Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with us today is my guest, Cindy Carrillo. How are you today, Cindy?
I've never been better. Just great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I am excited for this conversation. We were chatting a little bit before we started, and I didn't want to wait any longer to have you share all of this fantastic information with the listeners. So let me just say a little bit about you. You are the owner of NXT Coaching, as well as the Immersion to Find Your Next. You are an author, you are a coach, you have been a CEO, you're an advisor, you're doing all these amazing things. And the CC Blue Ranch, and you're going to tell us all about this, and I can't wait for the listeners to hear. So Cindy, again, welcome. And how about if you start us off just sharing a bit of your journey? Where did you begin and what happened in between that brought you to where you are now?
Thanks. I appreciate it. And I'd love to. I became an entrepreneur. Had no idea what that was. I just sort of saw a problem out there. After having a little bit of a roadmap career, I owned a plant shop. I ran children and youth programs. I worked for a United States senator. And then I went and got a master's in social work. And during that time, I had identified a problem that existed. Now, I'm going to age myself a little bit. This was like back in the 80s. And I was pretty newly married, and I married a family practice doc, a guy who became a family practice doc, had a baby, and found myself in a place at that time that so many parents then and still today find themselves in, where you have a child, you're trying to figure out how to work, especially women, but working parents in general, and figuring out caregiving. How do I do it all? So at that time, child care was still kind of new and difficult to find, difficult to maneuver and figure out how to do it. And I decided to start a company to address that issue, and started a company that worked with corporations to support working parents, and developed a unique set of benefits and programs that weren't available in the community to help people who were working. And over the course of 20 some odd years, I ran that company, built that company, led that company, loved that company, until I reached a point in my own career and development, and also the company's development, where I realized that it wasn't about making it up anymore, which is kind of the entrepreneurial side of me. And it was about more maintaining and scaling and just growing it, what we had developed over the years. And that wasn't me anymore. And I really wasn't the person to take the company forward. So I came to the very difficult decision to sell the company and to move on, which had quite the ripple effect on the people who worked for me at the time and my clients and just life in general, on my kids, I was divorced at that time, so my ex-husband, the whole thing. I was sort of throwing it up in the air and saying, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, so what's next? And I was very fortunate in that the company did sell, and it sold at a unique time in our history in this country, which was about 2008, where the economy kind of tanked. The real estate market imploded. And if you remember back then, it was a little chaotic, and still got the company sold during that time. And I found myself in this amazing position of having some resources and looking to make this next move and really wanting to do it in a way that was, I didn't think it was going to be so dramatic when I did it, but it ended up being kind of dramatic, a major transformation of my life. And that was the first inkling that I had of this process of figuring out what's next in our lives, where there's a big change. And sometimes it's big, sometimes it's transformational, like I went through, and sometimes it's just about finding a new job or figuring out where to move next or whatever kind of change in your life. And that became the foundation of a concept called finding your next for me to figure out.
Wow. Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing that with us. And bravo. Congratulations for selling your business at a time that, as you just shared, was really challenging time in our economy and in this country. And I do remember because I am old enough. And as are many of the listeners will remember 2005, 8, 10 timeframe. And so bravo for that. And also for being brave enough to realize that you needed to step out of that and let somebody else continue carrying that on and find your next. And we're going to talk even more deeply about this. But I think many of us are scared about what comes next because we have no idea. And we cling really tightly to what we've been doing before because we don't know anything else.
So true.
And yeah, so talk with us a little bit more about what came next for you.
Well, I'll tell you, I think what you're addressing is a few fears that get in our way. And I fell victim to them as well and was really starting to be paralyzed a little bit during the process and had to really break through the blocks that these fears can cause. And what I identified early on in this process for myself of finding my next was that the first fear I had to overcome was the fear of the unknown. And it's what you were just talking about. We know what we know. And even if it's not great, and in my situation, I was happy. I wasn't running from something. I wasn't, trying to get away from a bad situation. This was very opportunistic for me. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent. The fear of the unknown can stop us from moving ahead. And I understand who wants to stand on the edge of like a cliff looking down into this deep, dark abyss and jump. And it's like we don't know. But what I came to understand in the process of finding my next was that the fear of the unknown is an indication that I had more questions than answers. And that's okay. But what I needed to concentrate on was the process of answering the questions, of asking myself, what are the opportunities to kind of build the bridge over that abyss, to be able to see a pathway forward that is different from where I stood. So that was the first block. The second block, I think a lot of us, I hope I'm not alone in this, a lot of us face is the fear of failure. What if it doesn't work? What if I make a mistake? What if I blow it? What if I do something really stupid? And that's what if people think I'm stupid? What if they question me and judge me? And that's where the fear of failure comes in. So my mother was such a smart woman. And my mother taught me a game early on when I would get into this fear of failure. And I then implemented this when I was at this pivotal point of my life of figuring out what was next. And the game was, what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? And what I've learned over the years is kind of short of death and maiming. Okay. So what's the worst that can happen? Pizza, I was looking, by the way, to find kind of a piece of property and maybe change my life and live in a rural area and sort of live the little house on the prairie kind of lifestyle, but with a whole lot more comfort and stuff. And so that was kind of the vision that I had. And I'm like, what if I don't like that life? Oh, okay. Well, then I guess I'll make a change again. What if I find a piece of property and it doesn't turn out to be the it property? Well, okay. People buy and sell properties all the time. every time I came up with what if I move here and nobody comes to visit? What if? So I had to work through the what ifs and realize that all the stuff of the fear of failure was so much bigger in my head. And when I started to break it down to ask myself, really, how bad could it get? And what is this thing called failure anyway? It started to dissipate. And then I came to the realization going through this process that I actually consider failure now to be a 4-letter word. I don't say it. I just said it. But I don't usually say it and refer to it. And the reason is because I don't believe it to be true. I don't believe we fail if we learn. Because then we're growing, we're expanding, we're evolving. So where is the failure in that? And the only time I think failure would exist, is if we don't recognize the lessons of the mistake. And as long as I'm willing to recognize the lessons and learn and grow, there ain't no such thing as failure in my vocabulary. So go, do, move forward, keep going. And that's where I got to. And the third block that I've discovered keeps us where we think we're comfortable is our willingness to settle, because we let the fear of failure and the fear of the unknown keep us where we are. And we think sometimes that it's easier to stay there than exert the time and the effort to move into something new and more and better. And it's usually not. It usually takes a lot more energy to keep us where we are to settle for what we've got.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Cindy, fantastic. I love it. And there's so much in there that I want to address. It's just like words of wisdom coming left and right in there for sure. I love that there's no failure. Really, what you're describing is it's just experimenting, right?
Yes.
It's I'm trying something that didn't work. I'm trying something that didn't work. What can I get out of those two things?
Yes.
And try something different next. And that's just brilliant. I think we all need to remember that and view it from that lens and perspective. And the idea that we can ask ourselves the questions: what am I afraid of if I make this
Yes.
change or this leap? And so then what?
Then what? Then we
Yeah.
can address it. We can just vanquish the monsters and the voices that are in our heads that often are much louder and much scarier when they live in there. Once we say these things, we ask these questions out loud, we realize it ain't so bad. It ain't so scary. And we're much bigger and better and stronger and smarter than those voices in our head.
Yeah. Amen to that. And you know what you just were sharing made me think of making a mountain out of a molehill, and that old expression that these things in our head just become like the size of a mountain when really they're not. They're this big.
Yeah.
But because they stay up in our heads instead of maybe on a piece of paper and we're addressing it, we're really looking at what is it?
Then we can attack it. Then we
Right.
can address it. So this need for information, this need for the known, I get it. When I'm moving through this process and I decide I want to go and change my life, where I live, but more importantly, my lifestyle, right? And I'm going to go and leave suburban Boulder, Colorado, and move to a rural community. I found 35 of the most magnificent acres you've ever seen, with views that could knock your socks off. But there was nothing on the property. Nothing except for pasture and a few trees and old dilapidated fencing. And I pull up in this place and I'm like, oh my goodness, if this isn't scary, because I've never built a house before. I've never been a rancher or a farmer before. And here I am looking at this and going, I'm going to have to start from scratch. I know nothing. But when I stood on that property and I looked out there, man, I could see a life start to unfold in front of me. That fear I had of what if I do this and nobody will come? I'm like, oh my goodness, who wouldn't want to come here? And if I set it up in a way where people would want to come in an environment that is inviting and welcoming, of course I was going to do that because this was a place that needed to be shared. So that was sort of the building blocks in the start of, I'm going to get past the fear of the unknown because I'm going to make this shit up and create this thing and start a new life and build it from a foundation that really was capitalizing on who I was and everything that I had lived before in my life. All of that came with me. All the fears about starting from scratch and who the heck am I and I don't know anything and oh my God, I've never done this before. Well, I may not have done this before, but I've run a company. I've worked many kinds of jobs. I'm a great entertainer and a host. I've raised animals before. I've raised a family before. I think I can raise a goat, maybe. You know, if I raise kids, I think I can raise a goat. I don't know. Is it far-fetched? At least I thought so. I thought I could do it. And I thought I'm willing to try. And that I think is really the basic need before you start to embark on the process of a big change in your life, which is really code for finding your next. We're just trying to make a change. One of the big criteria for that is I'm ready. I'm excited. I may not have all the answers, but I'm ready to engage in the process of answering the questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And thank you for sharing that with us because it's brilliant in its, basic, what do I need to know from what I've done before that I could carry forward and use those skills to tackle this next thing. And we all have that, right? We have that experience and those skills from before. And how can we translate them into what we need to do next or what we're curious about trying next? And I could just envision, as you were describing, standing there looking out and the excitement, right? And how does that change everything when you're excited about it? You can see the vision of it coming to life. And how exciting is that? I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. So you were describing the property that you purchased and what you eventually created is the CC Blue Ranch. Yes?
Correct. So here's this 35 acres, and we are starting from the ground up, which is different than starting from scratch. And what I knew we had to start with was I needed to build a house. There's no house. And I thought, I am 6-hour drive from my friends and family. We're in the southwest portion of Colorado. Colorado's a big state. It's about a 6-hour drive to get back to the suburban area, the metropolitan area around Denver and Boulder. So I knew that if people were going to come, if my kids were going to come, if our friends were going to come, that they weren't stopping by for dinner. We needed to make sure we had the right kind of accommodations. So we decided to build a second home or a smaller guest house along with the main house and went out looking for architects and builders to do that. And what I came up with, because I had never done this before, but again, I had run a company before. So now I'm building a structure, but I didn't really know what I wanted it to look like. Instead, I knew what I wanted it to do. I knew what I wanted it to feel like. So I came up with 10 points that I wanted the houses to be able to do. They needed to embrace nature, right? We're living in this gorgeous area. So needed to have a bunch of windows and outdoor living areas, and it needed to embrace and be a part of the nature. So whatever style we did needed to fit in. I wanted it to be a sustainable life, a sustainable lifestyle, and take care of the fact that we're in a valley. We have lots of wind, lots of sun. So how do we create a sustainable lifestyle? I knew at one point we'd have a garden, we'd have some animals, we would grow things in our fields, we would be sustainable. Energy, renewable energy, that whole thing to encompass. We needed the space to expand when we had a bunch of people here, but contract for my partner Matthew and I to feel comfortable. We wanted this to be a place to share. So I came up with, there are a few more things in there, a 10-point list. And I went looking for architects. I went to 5. 4 out of the 5, their response to my list was, yes. How many bedrooms? How many bathrooms? What's the style? Are you traditional? Are you modern? What do you want to do? Do you want an open floor plan? You want? And I'm like, but I don't know. Let's work together on that. And nobody could get past the framework of the house. And I was looking for the purpose of these buildings until I met one architect. And he read the list and he looked up at me and he goes, "Oh my God, Cindy, I think you just gave me a mission statement for your house." And I looked at him and said, "Yes, I think you're right." And really what that became was the why behind why we wanted to do all of this. So I started calling it my big why. Because why am I doing this transformation? Why am I making this change? Why do I want this next? And what do I want it to do for me? So that criteria was about the life that I wanted to live. And then we set out, obviously I hired him, and then we set out to design the structures to address the why, to address what the houses needed to do. And every building since then, the barn, the garden, we've got a big dome greenhouse. We have an extra garage. We put in a yurt. Every structure that has been put on this property had to fit the criteria that was defined way back then about the why.
Yeah. You know what? And that is it. That is the prime thing. Why? Why are you doing anything? And that answer to that question is going to be the determining factor for everything that you do after, right? I
But
mean,
we usually start with the what. What kind of
the
job?
how.
What kind of vacation am I going to get? What kind of house am I looking for? What kind of relationship? What kind of guy am I going to date? It doesn't matter. We start with the what. And when I coach with clients, and really what I personally and intimately came to the conclusion is that's putting the cart before the horse. Then we have all kinds of questions and unanswered pieces of information. We don't know how to address it because we haven't set out the criteria for ourselves of why, which really is what's most important to us about the life we want to live.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. The what instead of the why, but also we often do the how
Yeah.
do I do before you even say why you want to do something. And so you're trying to solve problems that you're not even ready to solve yet. And I think so many of us do that, and that stops us from
Yes.
even taking a step forward, I think.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And so it's good for everybody who's listening to understand that I'm very tactical when I need to be tactical. Don't get me wrong. The what and the how, the where and the when, really important to take action to actually step into your next. But first, step back and ask yourself what's most important to you about the life. Because when we work, it affects our life. It's the biggest part of our life sometimes, right? So when we understand the life we want, then we can set out to design that and hold all those other things in our lives to that standard.
Yeah. Great stuff. Cindy, I love it. This has just been so fantastic so far. I want to ask you, what would you say were things that maybe kind of blocked you from changing? And if that makes sense, if there was something that maybe stopped you or you thought, how do I overcome these things to get to where I want to go? Do you have something you want to share about that?
Yeah, I went through a period of time. We were already living here. We had the house. We had moved in and we were starting the lifestyle. And when it came to getting animals on the property, we started with cows. Oh, God, we messed up with the cows on certain ways. There's some stories in a book I wrote on finding your next we could talk about. Just talk about trial and error and figuring it out. You have to figure it out. But when it came to building a barn and making a commitment to really bringing some animals in, I really started to doubt my own capabilities and the kind of who am I to ... Who am I to think I can be a farmer or a rancher? Who am I to think I could start a business? Who am I to think that I could travel to Europe on my own? It doesn't matter what the who am I, the ... We all kind of get into that. And when I ran the company, I sometimes had that self-doubt. Who am I to take this company forward? Who am I to hire people who know more than that? Who am I? Well, I found myself in the same, I'm going to build a barn and fill it with animals. Who am I? I didn't grow up with this. I didn't know farms. I didn't know anything about this lifestyle. Again, questions, need for information. So what I needed to do at that point was to say, who am I? I'm a capable, smart, dedicated, driven woman who can figure stuff out. That's who I am. So get out of your way. And so I kind of had to elbow myself out of the way and step around and step forward and say, what do I need to know in order to do it? I had to do it when I ran a business. I had to do it when I was going to build a barn. So it doesn't really matter what it is. If we're trying to talk ourselves out of it, it means we're back to the blockers again. And that's an important concept in the process of finding your next. Sometimes people believe that once they power through and knock those blockers out of their way, it's clear sailing. Man, I got it. I did it. I'm through it. I'm good. Well, I'm here to tell you this process of me finding my next and stepping into it was years. It was an evolution. And I found that those stupid blockers popped up time and again. What I got better at is recognizing them and kicking them away sooner in the process. But they're always there. They're always there. We just get better at it.
Yeah, great point there for sure. It's that continuing to recognize that you've got these skills and you can figure it out. If you are determined to make something happen, you will find a way to make it happen. And just continuing to remember that and learning from that, that you can take those steps and, like you said, kick those blocks out of the way. Like, I've been here before. I recognize it. I see what's happening. I'm gonna move this aside and keep going forward. And that's excellent advice. So thank you for sharing that with us. And so I want to have you share with us in creating the ranch, and you've shared about you wanted family and your children and friends to come and stay, but it's become more than that. And so please tell us about it because I think it's so, so lovely.
We knew when we saw this property that, as I mentioned earlier, this was a place to share. So we knew that we were going to create an environment, a lifestyle to share with people. And as we evolved the life that we were living to include some gardening and canning and all those kind of things that sort of that homesteading-ish, that country-ish life that I am now living. I actually bake and can and do things I never did before. but I love it, is also I love working. I love to work. And the ranch is work, and it's a different kind of work. But when I left the company and running a company, the that intellectual side of working and challenges, and I really needed more of that. And really, a subset of the next for me was figuring out how to work within the lifestyle that I was designing. I realized that I have been a mentor and a coach my entire adult life, probably as a child too. I was that one. And so it became very logical for me to take the experience that I've had in over 40 years of business and the skills that I learned when I went back and got my master's in social work early in my career, and blend those together with living on the ranch and start a coaching business. So here I was working at the ranch, on the ranch, but also wanting to work and give back and earn. So then I started a coaching business called NXT Coaching, because this is all about my next and everybody else's next. I started that about 12 years ago when we kind of moved on to the ranch. In the evolution of the ranch as well, with the guest house and the yurt, and the fact that we had this lifestyle and wanted to share it, we also decided to open it up because it wasn't full all the time with friends and family. So we started an Airbnb, and we started to welcome strangers onto the property and share our life with them as well, and let them pet baby goats, and let them go out and feed the cows, and let them come out and pull fresh tomatoes from the greenhouse, and really share the life that we were living. We ended up really wanting to capitalize on the environment and the lifestyle that we created. We're now at a point where we're backing off of the short-term rentals a little bit more, and now morphing into more of a coaching environment, where I've started a new program called the Immersion to Find Your Next, where clients actually come to the ranch and we put them up and they work one-on-one with me for 2.5 days in an immersive environment, which is the ranch, which is called CC Blue. And they come here, they get out of their current reality, and together we figure out what's next for them. And it's
Oh, yeah. It sounds amazing. The experience alone of being on a farm, on a working farm, and being with the animals, I think is amazing. And so many people never, ever have an opportunity to do anything like that. And so to offer this as opening it up to people as an opportunity to come and grow and learn and do something they've never experienced before, all while working on exploring themselves
yep.
and what comes
Yes.
next, I think is amazing.
It's also a very unique kind of retreat for people, in that when I was looking at developing the program, I realized that you can pretty much go anywhere in the world on any day of the week and any time of the year and find a retreat that's a group setting where you go and you're amongst many to try and figure out what your individual needs are. And I didn't want to do that. I love the personal interaction. I love the one-on-one interaction. It's my sweet spot in coaching. So that's how we built the immersion program to Find Your Next. Here is it's only for individuals to come by themselves to work with me for 2.5 days, or couples, because if you're going to find your next and you've got a partner, you probably should be aligned on that. Or business partners who oftentimes don't have anyone, they don't have the ability to sit down and have really hard and meaningful conversations about where they want their joint business to go that aligns with their own personal lives. And to have somebody sort of guide them through that conversation of what's really important to the two of them is a unique kind of program to be a part of. So that's all I do. That's all I do here. I either coach individuals like through Zoom or the phone, or they come here to the ranch to really have that immersive experience. And it's awesome for my partner Matthew and I love it. I've kind of designed the best of all worlds for me.
And isn't that really what we all want, is to design the best of all worlds for ourselves, right? And I love that you're making this an option for couples and business partners, because you're absolutely right. If you're not on the same page about where you want to go, forget it.
Forget it. You're
Yeah.
just in conflict, and you may be in quiet conflict, but you're in conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, for
And it
sure.
will hold your business back.
Absolutely. If not, destroy it. So, yeah. Thank you again for sharing that. I want to ask you now if there's, for the listener who is thinking, like, I want to maybe begin to make a change in, start this new journey in my life. Like, what are some steps that they can take?
Great question. So there's something fundamental to making change. And we've talked about the things getting in the way, but this is a question you just asked about, how do I actually do it? How do I take the first step? And this is going to sound kind of, I don't know, simple maybe, but it's so crucial and it's a step we don't often talk about. You have to decide to do it. You have to make the decision to enter the process of change. And it is a decision. You can't take action until you've made the decision. You can't explore the possibilities until you decide to go in that direction. So the first thing you have to do is say, I'm ready. I'm ready. Then when you start to explore what's important to you, list out the criteria. And I will tell you the process that I'm talking to you about now, I've just written a workbook for. So it'll be coming out in early August. So there's going to be a guide for people to take them through the process of finding their next, because it's daunting sometimes when you haven't had to be intentional about making a change. Oftentimes, change happens to us, or there's a certain momentum that takes us down the road, and we follow and we kind of go down the stream and where it takes us. What we're talking about with finding your next here is intentional change that you make a decision to make.
Yeah, excellent. Great. I love it. So now I want to ask you then about your book, because you mentioned the workbook, but I know you have a fairly recently released book. And so I want you to share that with us. It's Finding Your Next When You're Ready for the Life You Really Want. And so please, Cindy, share with us what the listeners might be able to discover in the book.
So, I decided to be a little vulnerable here. It was a little vulnerable exercise to write a book. I don't know if you know that, but it's really my story of finding the next, of moving from being a CEO and selling my business and stepping into a life where I decided I wanted to be a ranch girl. And how do you do that? So, everything from that process of making the decision, once I'm standing on this property and looking out there, to take that next step and buy the property, which was a big deal, and then start the planning process and making that list of why, and then deciding to get cows, and then deciding to get chickens, and then getting pigs and goats and miniature horses and donkeys. And we have a goose named Debbie who kind of thinks she's all the species and runs the entire barn. And decide to garden and can and get through all of the blocks along the way and make all the mistakes. And it's a funny book because There's lots of funny stories and lots of lessons learned along the way that then become really the step-by-step guide of how to go through the process of finding your next. So the book is on Amazon. The workbook is just being released on Amazon. There's the Kindle version. And I just, oh my goodness, talk about another next. I just recorded the audiobook, and that's coming out on August 1st. And that was a whole new experience. But I figured it's my story. I probably should read the book. So hopefully, between the book, the workbook, whatever form you decide to listen to the story, it opens up possibilities for others because I got to tell you, I'm pretty ordinary. And if I could do it and I could persevere and I can enjoy it and define it and make the decision and go out there and make it happen, hopefully others will feel like they too can decide whatever changes they want to make are possible. You don't have to transform your life the way I have, for sure, but it's an extreme version, and you can always understand then what the possibilities are for you.
Oh, fantastic. I love it. I will absolutely include the information in the show notes for the listeners to find that. And thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for the workbook too, because that's going to be super helpful. And congratulations on being able to record the story as well for the listeners to hear as they're reading or just listen along. I love that. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I always love to ask my guests if there are other books also that they have found to be beneficial or influential in their lives that they think would be helpful for the listeners. Do you have some that you'd like to share with us?
I have found an author that I adore, and she writes books about being a badass. I love that. She's pretty irreverent about the whole thing, and it's Jen Sincero. I think you pronounce it Sincero. And she has a series of books that I think I've just fallen in love with her tone and her belief that we can all do whatever we want to do. So I admire her as an author, and she's also another coach. So great books.
Yes, her books are fantastic. I love them as well. You know, just like you said, the tone that the way that she writes the books, it's so approachable and
Yeah.
it's so encouraging and fun and funny. And yeah, love her as well. So great recommendation. Do you listen to podcasts? Is there any that you think might be helpful for the listeners?
I don't listen to a lot of podcasts because I'm a big audiobook girl and I love a lot of fiction to get out of my head. I love your podcast. I gotta say, I went back and listened to a bunch of them. I think you do a fabulous job with your podcast. So I would say yours.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And Cindy, this has been a delight. I have truly enjoyed our conversation and everything that you have shared with us. I think all of the listeners, myself included, can just take these words of wisdom, these pieces of advice that are so just fundamental, but really can be the catalyst and the change that helps us take the steps forward to our next thing. And so thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this with us, Cindy. I so appreciate it.
My pleasure, truly. Thank you.
Well, lastly, before we close, would you share with us now, the listeners, how they might be able to find you if they want to ask more questions, dig into what you're doing, learn more about CC Blue Ranch? How would they be able to do that?
So the title of the book, of course, here, is Finding Your Next. And next is NXT. I think just because it's that big and that important, it's finding your next. And that's my website too, is Finding Your Next with an NXT for next.com. And my contact information is there. My coaching is there. My immersion program is there. And of course, like we said before, the book is on Amazon, and then the audiobook will be on Audible, and the workbook will be on Amazon as well.
Perfect. Yes, thank you for sharing that. I will include all of that information in the notes. Are you on social media? Instagram,
Yeah.
Facebook?
LinkedIn, Facebook, everything is Finding Your Next, except for follow me on Instagram for CC Blue Ridgeway for all things CC Blue Ranch. So it's CC Blue, BLUE, Ridgeway, RIDGWAY. And I'm on Instagram and would love everybody to follow because there's so many cute pictures of animals and silly things that happen on the ranch and beautiful pictures of sunrises and sunsets and that sort of thing. We have a ball here.
Oh gosh, excellent, excellent. I for sure will include that information, and I follow you there as well, so I love it. And I think that anybody's looking for just some joy and great views and animals, it's yes, absolutely, you need to be following the account. So for sure, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that all with us. Again, Cindy, I appreciate your time and your wisdom and knowledge, and thank you again for sharing that with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll talk more soon.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.